In this video, we're going to learn all about lipids from the biological molecules unit. Now, you may know already that there are two types of lipid that we need to learn about specifically and in detail. So these would be the triglycerides and the phospholipids. Now, triglycerides contain the elements carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Obviously, phospholipids also have that phosphate group. So they have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and phosphorus as well, which is found in the phosphate group. Let's look at triglycerides first. In terms of their function, triglycerides are used for energy storage. So they're stored in the body, in the adipose tissue, and they can be broken down to release energy. In terms of structure, triglycerides are made from glycerol and 3 fatty acids. So let's draw a triglyceride. So glycerol looks like this. You should be able to just draw glycerol on its own. So I'll draw glycerol just on its own first. So that's what glycerol looks like. Fatty acids, this is how I would draw a fatty acid. I would draw it like that. So we've got the carboxyl group or the COOH group, and then we've got a variable side chain. Now this is going to be a hydrocarbon chain, but it can vary in the number of carbons and the number of hydrogens. It might be saturated, which means there are no carbon-carbon double bonds. It might be unsaturated because there are carbon-carbon double bonds. But because it varies between fatty acids, we can use the letter R, or you might see some teachers using like the zigzag line to represent the hydrocarbon chain. I'm going to use the letter R, I think. And I'm going to draw 3 fatty acids like this because a triglyceride does have 3 fatty acids. So let's go ahead and draw 3 of them. Like that. Then we can show how the triglyceride is formed. Now, a triglyceride is formed via 3 condensation reactions. Now, condensation reactions obviously make bonds by removing water. So what we're going to do is remove a molecule of water there, another molecule of water there, and another molecule of water there. So we're taking the hydroxyl group from the carboxyl group of the fatty acid, and we're taking the hydrogen from the hydroxyl group of the glycerol. If I show the removal of water like this, then I can show the formation of that bond. Now this bond is called an ester bond, okay? I'm going to do that obviously 3 more times to make my triglyceride. So I'm removing 3 molecules of water in total, and I'm producing a triglyceride, which consists of glycerol and 3 fatty acids and 3 ester bonds, okay? 3 condensation reactions. So I've produced 3 molecules of water in those 3 condensation reactions. Now, in terms of properties of triglycerides, triglycerides are obviously insoluble. So they don't dissolve in water. They are what we would call hydrophobic, okay? They repel water. And something else we can say is they are non-polar. So there's no uneven distribution of charge, which makes them hydrophobic and insoluble. So that's our triglycerides. Let's move on to our phospholipids. Now, in terms of function, phospholipids are forming the cell membrane, the cell surface membrane. Not just the cell surface membrane, they're also forming like the membrane around the mitochondria, the chloroplast, the nuclear membrane, but they form a bilayer, don't they? So we get a phospholipid bilayer. And this helps to control the passage of substance into and out of a cell because only small non-polar substances can cross that phospholipid bilayer by simple diffusion. Except for water. Water is polar, but water can diffuse across the phospholipid bilayer very slowly though. Okay, so the phospholipids are controlling the entry and exit of substances across the cell surface membrane. So they've got that very specific function. Now, in terms of their structure, luckily we don't have to draw the structure of a phospholipid in as much detail as a triglyceride. So you might see a phospholipid just drawn like this, where we refer to the head and the tails. You might see it drawn like this, where we've still got the tails. It's just for the head portion of the phospholipid, we're showing that the head actually consists of glycerol and a phosphate group. So this is why we've got phosphorus in a phospholipid, because it's in that phosphate group. So the head portion that we drew really simply here, the head contains glycerol and a phosphate group, and then we've only got 2 fatty acids, not 3. So the tails are the 2 fatty acid tails. So it's a much simpler drawing for A-level biology. But we do need to think about the properties. Now, the phosphate group is negatively charged. Okay, so this means that a phospholipid is polar. It has an uneven distribution of charge. And in fact, because of that negatively charged phosphate group, the head is going to be hydrophilic. So the head is going to attract water, which is why we find it on the outside of the phospholipid bilayer, because it's attracted to water. The tails are hydrophobic. So they repel water, which is why we find them on the inside of the phospholipid bilayer. So in terms of comparisons then, quite a lot of questions on A-level biology will ask you to give similarities or differences between these 2 types of lipids. So in terms of similarities, well, they both contain carbon, hydrogen and oxygen. They both contain glycerol. Triglyceride has glycerol. Phospholipid has glycerol. They both contain ester bonds. Triglyceride has 3 ester bonds, phospholipid has 2, but they both contain ester bonds, and they do both contain fatty acids. Now, in terms of differences, the phospholipids only had the 2 fatty acids, whereas the triglyceride obviously has 3 fatty acids, and the phospholipid has a phosphate group. You can say the phospholipid has a phosphate group in place of one of the amino acids. So the phospholipid has a phosphate group, and obviously the triglyceride doesn't have a phosphate group. In terms of function, phospholipids form a phospholipid bilayer. Triglycerides don't form a bilayer. They're actually used for energy storage. And in terms of properties, triglycerides are non-polar or hydrophobic, whereas our phospholipids are polar, or we can say they have both hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions. The head is hydrophilic, attracted to water. The tails are hydrophobic. They repel water. Any other differences that I've missed, guys? I suppose we could say the phospholipid has 2 ester bonds. So we use 2 condensation reactions and remove 2 molecules of water to form 2 ester bonds here and here. Whereas the triglyceride has 3 ester bonds, so 3 condensation reactions, removing 3 molecules of water to make 3 ester bonds. But yeah, it could be like a 5 or 6 marker, that one. So make sure you know the similarities and the differences in terms of structure, property and function between your 2 types of lipid. Let me know in the comments if you found that video useful, and also let me know if there's any other biological molecules that you want explaining for A-level biology.